Hello. Welcome to the RCA's Visual Culture Lecture Series. My name's Rebecca Fortnum and I'm the Senior Tutor in Research here in the School of Fine Art. So the lecture series is called Orientations, Locate and Reshape, and it addresses the theme of global transformations. This year, in order to better understand the context in which art is made and received, the aim is to extend the debate from our cultural and contextual awareness of global change through a focused engagement on cultural identities, considering such themes as national or cultural belonging, gender identities, and the politics of technology. Observing societal changes with instability and uncertainty of this year ahead, we will ask how we can transform, orientate, or reorientate existing practices, disciplines, and structures in order to meet these challenges. And the big questions for us to do with how we can address and reshape presumed territories, ideas, and models to create other ways of seeing the future. So the panel that we're welcoming tonight are 4 artists, and they'll consider the notion of the graphic witness, a term that's been used that harnesses the power of drawing to challenge and question, reflecting on its capacity to record and reflect protest, as well as to produce images that bear witness to social injustice and even the horrors of war. It explores the ways drawings can move beyond documentation of man's inhumanity to man to become active agents in understanding how political ideals are corrupted and reminders not to stand by, but to act. So this panel discussion is related to the exhibition Graphic Witness at the Drawing Room, curated by Kate McFarlane, that I believe opens tomorrow. And the panel discussion and the exhibition emerges from a chapter of the same name, Graphic Witness, by Kate McFarlane, that was commissioned for the Companion to Contemporary Drawing, which is edited by myself and my colleague, Kelly Corpening, from University of the Arts, London, and that's going to be published by Wiley Blackwell in 2018. The Companion to Contemporary Drawing will explore the way drawing has been used by contemporary and 20th century artists to understand and comment on the world. A range of contributors, both practitioners and theorists, established writers in the field of art and philosophy, and lesser known specialists and researchers, examine how drawing emerges from the workings of the mind, eye, and hand to represent, question, and reflect on both the real and the imagined. It will examine the shifts in attitudes to the practice of drawing, including how technological innovations over the past 100 years have utterly transformed notions of observation, representation, and audience. Most importantly, the volume will present key themes that have arisen in contemporary drawing practice while emphasizing the working conditions of artists, enabling the consideration of an array of personal, social, and political concerns that have influenced artistic choices. Whilst drawing has an immediacy that is compelling, we believe that meaning of techniques and approaches changes over time, and thus it's important to situate the works of contemporary practitioners in their historical moment. The book will be divided into 3 sections: the power of drawing, and that's the section that houses the graphic witness essay. A second part speculating on the specific qualities of drawing, that's titled The Conditions of Drawing. And a final section, The Expanse of Drawing, tracing the expanded field of drawing within contemporary fine art practice. We are absolutely delighted that Kate's chapter has been included in the volume. And we should add that we're planning other events that relate to the book, including an exhibition of drawing in the new art space at Camberwell College next year. So I'd now like to introduce to you my colleague, Margarita Glucksberg, who will be chairing the event. Many of you will know Margarita, because she's a magnificent drawer, amongst other things. And she's, of course, a reader of contemporary visual art production here at the RCA. Born in Moscow in 1979. Sorry, born in Moscow, Margarita is an artist who has lived and worked in London since 1979. Rolling back the years. Her practice spans drawing, painting, installation, photography and performance. Glucksberg's work has been presented at major contemporary art spaces, including MAC Val in Paris, CAC Vilnius, Rosia Malmo, the Kaed Kunststal in the Netherlands, Lund's Konststal Lund, British School in Rome, where she was a Wingate scholar, and the Delawarr Pavilion in Bexhill. And last year, a new drawing projection installation was included in Double Take exhibition at the Drawing Room. She's currently working on a project supported by the Wellcome Trust called Rock on Bones, and that's the name of a phenomenon in Soviet Russia where illicit recordings of Western pop music were produced on discarded medical X-ray transparencies and sold on street corners. She's recently completed a series of performances as part of the project at the Delawarr Pavilion in Bexhill, at the Performance Studio London, and here at the Royal College. And she'll be introducing our artists who are speaking tonight. Thank you.
Out the geography of this talk. Shall we all go up here and then we can sit or not? What do you think?
We were thinking that we want to see everyone's presentations.
Okay. So shall I go up here and introduce I'll introduce the first person. So I'd like to introduce first of all Catherine Anyango Grunewald, and who was living in London, and I knew her here when she was also a tutor of visual research here at the Royal College of Art, but she's subsequently now based in Stockholm. She studied at the University College London and the RCA and Central St Martin's. She's now currently will be showing in the Graphic Witness exhibition, has shown in Bristol and Derby, Blank Projects, Cape Town. And one of the things that she's very kind of known for is also in 2010, the publication of her graphic novel, the adaptation of Heart of Darkness, which was met with critical acclaim. And she has produced live films and events around London, including Victoria and Albert Museum and the National Film Theatre. Catherine uses film, sculpture and mise-en-scène devices to reconstruct physical environments that are disrupted by psychological, intangible phenomenon. So she's working in very many different mediums. She is currently senior lecturer in illustration at Konstfack in Stockholm. So there are so many things about each artist. I've probably missed some of these things out. You know, Catherine's shown also in the British Library, Rugby Art Gallery, Royal College of Art, many other international and national spaces. So I think the best thing to do is to introduce her. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello. Should I just click on? Thank you, Margarita. And let's see. Oh, okay. Thank you very much for having me. And because this talk is based mainly on the event which is happening from tomorrow, the Graphic Witness exhibition, I'm going to be focusing on my drawing practice, in particular one project which documents victims of crime. But I thought I'd go a little bit. Oh, actually, I'm so sorry. I have to stop there for 1 second because I have to change the. Sorry. I have to change the setup. What's it called? Oh, where's the here? Yeah, but I think I have to turn off the mirroring. It's good that I'm first. Taking one for the team with the technical. Here. This comes from years of sorting out student presentations. See? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I would like to go a little bit back in time because I'm working with very contemporary imagery from CCTV and police photography, but I'd like to go back a little bit in time to introduce the notion of the other and the concept of the victim itself. Because what the idea of the other is, I'm sure you've all read Julia Kristeva, and the abject is the notion of the transgression of borders in terms of body and identity. And right now in the world, we're in a time and place where we're suffering a crisis of identity that comes, or not comes from, but manifests in very specific types of violence against very specific types of people who we do not consider the same as ourselves. And I say ourselves, including myself as one of you, but there's always different hierarchies in place. So the people we perceive as other are people like migrants or religious enemies or people of a different race. And so I thought this was an interesting image, because the first image is painted of Christopher Columbus going on his voyage to conquer the world. And the image on the bottom is migrants arriving via the Mediterranean to Europe. And it's the same, physically it's the same image, but our interpretation and appreciation of them is very different. Even though Columbus was responsible for a lot of the problems with the world today, he sort of spearheaded the slave trade and started the whole sort of colonization of Europe. And the Holocaust survivor Hugo Gryn, in one of his books, stated that before his death in 1996, that he believed that future historians would talk about the 20th century as the century of great wars, but also the century of the refugee. What he says is, almost nobody at the end of the century is where they were at the beginning of it. It has been an extraordinary period of movement and upheavals. And modernity, I think, is characterized by this idea of upheaval and intrusion of one thing into the other, and this crossing of borders. So the new into the old, the movement of things from one state to the other. Now the digital into the analog, the collective into the individual, the public into the private, and the known into the unknown. And as we all know, the unknown is completely monstrous to us. This is the 1527 map, the Carta Marina, which is the origin of the phrase, here be monsters, because what we didn't know was a place of monsters. And the ocean, as a metaphor, is kind of an engine for the trauma of modernity, because sea travel opened up the world. It promoted integration, mixing, spread, contamination. The plague spread through Europe because of new trade routes that had opened up in the sea. And so it sort of stands as a metaphor for all of the things which hurt us today. And obviously, right now, Europe is struggling with their reaction to the arrival of people by sea. And John Berger, again, one of our favorites, says, ours is a century of enforced travel, the century of disappearances, the century of people helplessly seeing others who are close to them disappear over the horizon. So in my work, I'm really interested in the idea of order and disorder, and specifically the breakdown of order within a system of order. So, for example, here, the horizon, as we see it in real life, doesn't represent anymore a border or a limit. The grid has been broken because we have been able to go beyond the previously unmappable areas. So our collective sense of identity is really disrupted at this point in time. And the other, who were once monsters, are constantly close, and borders between them and us are constantly shifting. And we have no real choice but to think of the world in terms of narrative. And these are two excerpts from the 7 basic plots, which are a series of 7, sometimes expanded into more, basic plots into which every story in the world can fit into. And so these are the voyage and the return. And all through history, we see the quest, the idea of the quest, as framed by a Western perspective. The quest, the voyage and the return, the hero, now are ambiguous because the direction of the quest has become multidirectional. It's no longer one person going out and conquering the other. So the idea of the quest, the voyage and the return is ambiguous, and the idea of the hero is very ambiguous. So I'm just going to talk a bit about Julia Kristeva because I'll use the word objection a little bit, and she describes the state of objection as something which flows from ambiguity, and a state in which identity, system, and order are disrupted. She describes the other as a place or sensation or figure to which we feel both compulsion and revulsion. So this, again, this idea of a border, if you cross, which if you cross it, creates a state of horror. And I found Julia Kristeva after I made the book that Margarita mentioned, Heart of Darkness, and which was written as a reaction in the 19th century to the colonization of the Congo by King Leopold, which was horrific and brutal. And so the Kristeva book articulated for me many of the themes that I was trying to struggle with when I was making this book, because I was so horrified by what I found. And it began my interest in this theme of order breaking down within a system, because the idea of colonialism is a new order being forced upon people, and the breaking down of identity by the intrusion of a new modernity. So this is a drawing from the book, and I won't go too much into the book because it's very old. So I was just... but it relates to what I'm going to talk to later, because I was trying to sort of portray two realities: a subjective reality in the sort of etching that I did in the corners, and the way I used the borders, and the reality of the world as it was. So the project I want to talk to you about is called Last Scene, and it's based on CCTV footage and police photography, or mobile phone photography of the last digitally or analogically recorded image of someone before at their death or at their disappearance. So the last time they appear on camera in the known world. And what's funny is at this point in time, these images are all in the public domain because we have access to a sort of very, very pictured world. The image on the right is one of Ouija. You must know Ouija. In the 1930s, he had sort of stood on a police radio, and he was running around photographing all the crime scenes. And it was so very rare at the time that he became a sort of semi-famous. And what you can see in that picture is the girl in the center smiling directly at the camera, because the occasion of having a camera in public was more exciting than actually her boyfriend, who is dead on the ground. So compare that with if you Google police shooting now. This is Michael Brown, who was killed in Ferguson. And you get your options. You get shooting, video shooting, gun, person who killed him, the autopsy, and you get a wealth of images from all angles. It's sort of completely recorded. So this idea of the other then becomes very, very close, because in Ouija's time it was something which was not really part of our lives. It was a sensation, and here it is now. So this idea of the husband and wife, it's always very banal, the crime scene photography now. And the reason we really fear the other is because we fear the existence of the other in ourselves. And the fact that crime and the arrival of the other disrupts public space in a way, because it brings a very private thing into the public, and it also takes the public into private homes. So these are just some of the sort of reference images I've been using. I just wanted to read a line from Choruses from the Rock by T.S. Eliot, because it kind of perfectly describes the moment of horror as we realize we don't just inhabit the wasteland, which is this spiritual desert he talks about, but it's actually the desert is in us. And he says, second, you neglect and belittle the desert. The desert is not remote in southern tropics. The desert is not only around the corner. The desert is squeezed in the tube train next to you. The desert is in the heart of your brother. So I find these photographs really fascinating because they're not taken for artistic purposes. They're objective recordings of a crime. They're trying to get as much detail in there as possible so that they can be used as part of an investigation. But there's sort of patterns which keep reoccurring, sort of because you have to stand back from the scene, and you have to use a certain lens, and there's never anyone in them, so they're kind of blank and chilling. So that's kind of with the outdoor ones, and with the more interior ones, it's usually a very, very banal scene indoors where just one thing is wrong. Like, for example, this chair has been flipped over, and I feel like with crime scenes that are of exteriors, they're of places which should never really have been photographed. There's no point, there's no reason for that photograph to exist unless something deeply significant happened there. And with these ones, they're places that should have really been returned to, but there's nobody there. So, going to the actual work now. This is one of the images. And so this is just 2 different kinds of pencil on paper. But I tried to draw them very forensically. This is a woman called Jill Mayer, Irish woman who was walking home from the pub and got attacked. So this is a CCTV image that was captured from the interior of a shop. And you can see her walking past the door, and then seconds later, the attacker runs past. And then she was first disappeared and then died. And the way I draw them is I draw them in negative with a very shiny pencil, and then I go over them with a darker pencil so that it fills in the gaps, but then it also gives it this sort of digital feeling. So yeah, I'm really interested in the idea of how you light them, because I have to light them to photograph them, and they are like negatives in a way, and they are kind of forensic. So the materiality of them is very important to the meaning, and I'll talk about this a bit more later. But what I'm really interested in, again, the collapse of the inside and the outside. So this idea that the police will come into your home to tell you that something from inside your home has been ruined. And it's interesting to note that our horror of exterior crime scenes comes kind of from the fact that they put on us an understanding of a space that is at the limit of our knowledge. So a man called Eugene Thacker, in a book called In the Dust of This Planet, says, it's about demonology. And he said, the demon often inhabits the edges of human understanding of the world. And crime scenes are often hinterlands, forests, moors, the bottom of the sea, the sort of the edges of reason, the fringes of things, not the center or the limit. And so this is from the excavation of the Moors, at the Moors murders. And I put this in, I talk about this image a lot because it's fun to note, not fun, but it's good to note that when we talk about these murders, we don't talk about the murderers. The place itself is so important that they're referred to as the Moors murderers because it's so mentally ungraspable. And then today when I got off the plane, every single newspaper was talking about Ian Brady, but through the metaphor of the Moors. So the idea of the limit of the understanding is also kind of apparent in the idea when something breaks down or the collapse of the systems by which we must live. So the law is a system in which we have to live as a society, and when that breaks down, we get a state of horror. So if we kind of go back to the idea of the ambiguous hero, the police are there to serve and protect us, but this is the Trayvon Martin case in Florida where he was shot unarmed in his neighborhood, and so it turned into a huge case because of the idea of the law itself being wrong, rather than the fact that somebody had, committed a crime and faced justice for it. Sorry, I should have said there are distressing images in this talk. Sorry. This was the setting. Again, it's a very banal scene, and it was the beginning of a wave of extrajudicial killings by police in America of mainly black and poor people. And so this is the first drawing I made in this series, and again, it's the same technique, but it's sort of trying to, first of all, pay homage to this last scene, which is so horrific in its reality. But also to try and, selfishly, what I'm trying to do, because I cannot understand this morally, is to try and find meaning by, through the act of drawing, and because they take so long, and because I have to look at these photos. So I mean, I'm not trying to say I'm changing the world, but it's a way for me to try and uncover something in these events. So just want to talk about the corpse a little bit. This is an image by Sally Mann, and the corpse is described by Kristeva as a wound with blood and pus, or the sickly, acrid smell of sweat, of decay, those bodily fluids, this defilement, this shit, the border of the condition of a human being. It is death infecting life. So it's literally the disintegration of a body into not a body. And this goes back to my interest in the idea of the breakdown of order within a system. It describes the physical state of decay in the body, but also the sort of breakdown of meaning. And this is the image from Dante's Inferno. And again, you have the idea of disintegration of body into not body. This is Paolo and Francesca. And the bodies seem to merge with the landscape in a way. And back to Thacker, he says, generally speaking, the Inferno is of interest not simply due to the panoply of monsters that inhabit its pages, but because of the way in which it carefully stratifies different types of demonic being and non-being. Within the paths, rivers, caverns, and fortresses of the Inferno, all boundaries collapse. There are human bodies melting into dead trees, rivers flowing with blood, and entire cities populated with the living dead. Demons possess the very landscape, not just teratological, but also geological and even climatological. And so this led to actually it's post-rationalization, I did this first, but this idea of death infecting life or abjection physically inhabiting a landscape is really interesting to me, this sort of how the emotional phenomena in a scene can charge it in sort of ghostly manner. And I find that graphite and paper has been a really good way for me to try and work through this. So this is Michael Brown, who was shot in Ferguson. You saw the pictures earlier. And he was lying for, I think, 4 hours on the hot pavement before somebody covered him. And so with this one, I made a film because the time was very important to me. So I felt like the more time I invested in the drawing, the more it would sort of, in my own head, make allowances for the time that he had spent lying there. So I made an animation and then went over and over it to sort of literally distress the paper until he started merging with the landscape. In the same manner that Sally Mann's. And I'll show you a tiny bit of the animation. I know we're pressed for time, so I won't. Okay, I might stop it there because I'm already getting late. So I've gone back to the idea of the dissolve from body into non-body in several different projects, but always trying to use the materiality of the materials to do so. So this is from Heart of Darkness, where he was talking about somebody was thrown overboard. This is a soap sculpture called Poor Chap, and because he's made of soap in water, he sort of slowly dissolves over the course of the exhibition. I'll skip these. I'm also interested in women, and here is it's a book called The Invention of Hysteria, and in this case, order or the authority of a grid or ordering images was used to create the idea of disorder, because these women were not actually hysterical, they were just photographed in different guises. And I made these drawings to kind of try and address this idea of hysteria and the having one foot in the real world and having one foot in your emotional world. So drew them very small to sort of break the image up and have gaps between the information to sort of recreate this dissolve between the physical and the mental. So I'm also interested in women and crime specifically. So I've made a parallel to the Last Scene series, recreating scenes of women who've been murdered in their homes or in specifically their beds or their neighborhoods, because it's statistically a woman is more likely to be murdered by someone she knows in a space that she knows, and a man is more likely to be murdered outside. And I'm interested in these images. These are Mexican ex voto paintings, and what they are is sort of petitions to saints to thank them for these things not happening. So in a way, they are an attempt to restore order before the disorder happens. But very interestingly, they often, in domestic situations, and they often address the same issues of violence. So this is one image, again, pencil, about Patricia Miller, who was killed in 1988 by a man called James Barnes. And he tied her to her bed and set fire to it. So the reason I do these in a more abstract way is because I haven't got access to the images in the same way that I have with the CCTV images. But also, I feel like, and so I was trying to again, get this charred feeling by the way I use the pencil. But I also became very interested in not representing the scenes, because I was kind of ethically concerned with my own self by the issues of representation and the ethics of who owns the images and the levels of realism I was using. So I've been trying to work more, there's another image coming up which is not nice. So I've been trying to work more abstractly to get the same ideas of homage across, but not specifically show the work. So this was a massacre in Kenya, where I grew up, and it was reported, this image was all over the news. So 147 people were killed in Garissa by Al-Shabaab last year. And at this point, I just thought I couldn't physically draw any more people. So I made this hash marks representing all the bodies. So it's 147, and then I rubbed them out. So because I like using pencil and eraser, because we all know exactly how they work. We all use pencil and eraser, so they're very democratic materials. And so the very act of erasing something leads you to understand that something is gone, but also then leaving the bits there sort of represented the bodies in a different way. And this was commissioned by Granta to talk about the refugee crisis. So I did it the same way, but just using blue. And okay, I've got 1 minute left. Maybe I'll just... H.P. Lovecraft, he wrote a lot about the sea. He had a phobia of fish. And he wrote about the sea as his hinterland, where horrific things happened. And in one story he wrote, "No death, no doom, no anguish can arouse the surpassing despair which flows from a loss of identity. Merging with nothingness is peaceful oblivion, but to be aware of existence and yet to know that one is no longer a definite being distinguished from other beings, that one no longer has a self, that is the nameless summit of agony and dread." And I feel that in the reporting of the migrant crisis, and the reporting of the crisis in Syria, and the reporting of many crises around the world, we forget that we're looking at individuals. This is a woman who died in Aleppo in her wheelchair because they just couldn't get to a hospital. And everywhere it's reported as a man and his wife. And it's not possible that they don't just have a name, but we're very used to not giving identities to those who we feel are other. So she's the subject of an animation that I have in the drawing room at the moment, which I'll just show you stills from. And so again, I'm using drawing to deconstruct the building behind her and sort of try and string out, because the news story I read was called "The Slow Death of a Woman in Aleppo," and I thought, even as I was drawing, I kind of felt sick with myself, because it's very easy to memorialize something or someone, and feel like you've created something, but it's only a forward-facing action. I mean, it doesn't make any difference to anything. And then the last drawing, this is also a drawing I have in the show now. Again, trying to get more abstract because I just don't feel comfortable using the realism. This is the death of Walter Scott, who was shot in the back by a policeman. And so I've tried to separate them on the paper and also try and just use a slightly different language, a looser language. And what I did here was, you can see the tree. I thought if I focused on the tree, we could possibly forget about the background for a second. So I made a tree rubbing, and then with charcoal, and then I filled in all the gaps with a pencil. And what I've found now in the way I'm working is the idea of abstraction can also reference the breaking down of order, because we're no longer having a frame of reference, a sort of real frame of reference to work with, and it makes you think in a different way. So as I was sitting, I mean, it took me so long, but as I was sitting there, then I'm thinking about all these things, and then so I find that this idea of abstraction as a way to show the breakdown of order, but also as using labor as a way to pay homage, is for me the idea of being a graphic witness, because we don't need to recreate images, we need to make them in a way that make people think. So that's me.
Thank you very much. So the next person, the next artist I'd like to introduce is Mounira Solh, and she was born in Beirut, now works in Amsterdam, lives and works in Amsterdam and Beirut. And Mounira is a visual artist with a practice that embraces video installations, painting and drawing, embroidery and performative gestures. It's in a way socially engaged and can be political and escapist all at once. She studied painting at the Lebanese University in Beirut, the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam, and was also research resident at the Rijksacademy in Amsterdam between 2007 and 2008. Her work also has been shown internationally widely, and she has had work in an exhibition at the Venice Biennale in 2015 and also at the Lebanese Pavilion there in 2007. She's currently in Documenta 14 in Athens and Kassel, and has shown at the New Museum in New York, in the Guild Gallery Mumbai, Kunstwerk Institute for Contemporary Art in Berlin, and has been part of the 11th International Istanbul Biennial. These are just some of the few things, so I'm going to hand her over. Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the talk. It was really great. So where shall I begin?
I can help you.
Yeah.
I'll gather the windows. Where?
Where's your presentation? Is it on here?
No. Just do that. I'll find it. If you wanna. Should it be this here?
It depends what you want to do. Do this. Then what you have there is on here.
Yeah. Thanks. All right. So I think I would like to introduce myself by being lazy. Laziness is good. So what I'll do, I'll let that video speak about me a little bit, and I'll watch with you. I've done that around 2006 or 7, and I'd like to shift from there to just, move to what has happened after 2011. So I will just start with this and then I'll go on. That's a video. And maybe that's okay.
مفيش حاجة تيجي كده ده حبيبي كده ترجع زي زمان يا ابني اسمعني حد دلعني تاخد عيني كمان حبيبي قرب بصي بصي بص زعلان ازعل نصي نص لحسن ابعد ونص هتبقى انت اكيد خسران مفيش احلى كده يا حبيبي
So, when did this? Yeah, that was 2006. So why I wanted to start with this is not only because of what it's saying, but also because of the medium I was using, video. And at that time, it was really how I could mostly, put all my ideas together. And actually, I studied painting at the Lebanese university, and that's like a very rotten institution. So while being there, it was very important to be against it. It's like like I grew up in the war in Lebanon, and after this, I was lucky that at the age of 14, it was just finished. So it was great to be able at that age to go out everywhere and go crazy, because that's the psychology. Imagine a country on war, then it stops. And so it was divided, things opened. We could meet people from all over. It was very intense, really. So, and then going to the university, you had to choose if you go to the Muslim branch or to the Christian branch, because the whole country was divided by two. So even a university such as the fine art or anything would be divided. So originally it was situated in the center of Beirut. Of course, that was the green zone where all the fights happened. So they had to manage the Christians going in the Christian parts, that is the Sharia, the east, and the Muslims going to the western parts, that is, Gharbiya. So I went to the Muslim branch of the Lebanese painting department, great university, and it was all about having, you know, Impressionists and Picasso, which is pronounced as mostly Picasso, and these kind of painters. And for me, it was really, I couldn't stand it, but at the same time, I had promised myself, okay, I'm gonna do it. You know, if I start something, I have to finish it. And I learned there, what I learned mostly is to hate painting. I really hate painting, you know, because I'm forced to copy Van Gogh, I'm forced to copy, you know, Les Trois Grâces, things like that are from books. Those books were actually, during the war, they were all stored and drowned in places, then they had to save them, and then one good woman saved a few, and we had them in the library. No one was ever interested. So we often went there, and you know, the woman responsible for the library should be like doing her kousa mahshi, so stuffed courgette, cooking for later, you know, preparing her food. And so the psychology was like that, you know, we're going to a place that we hate. And so my relationship with painting is like that, you know, it cannot be constructive. And also I grew up in a country on war where there was no museum, no gallery, but people loved culture, and they also did their best that things still happen even in the middle of the war. So, and then when I finished my studies, I worked as a year, you know, for a year as a painter. And then I thought, it's impossible, I really have to see a painting in a museum, right? I mean, you can't study paintings only in books and in Picasso and these things just from books. And there was no internet at that time like now, actually. So luckily I end up in the Netherlands, and when I first saw a real Van Gogh, it was like I almost fainted. It was very impressive to me. But it was also a time that there was a, you know, freshly Lebanon going out of the war. There's the generation of artists who actually are very active, and they kind of paved the way for people like me, who were, you know, starting to work in Lebanon, and painting was really something that you shouldn't do. It was very conceptual. It was like discussing the post-war, discussing how Beirut is being reconstructed. And it was maybe the first time Catherine David put up maybe Venice Biennale and at Documenta that the Lebanese artists were there. And first time in my life I go to the Netherlands and people knew, you know, they knew things because of those artists about Lebanon. And in a way it was very interesting, and also, you know, it was also shocking because everyone expected me to say something about the war. But my generation is the people who grew up in it as children until the age of 12 or 14. So I always found it more interesting to speak about how we survived, not about how we died, because that is how the daily struggle is. You need to think of how you get your water, where you get your fuel. Am I gonna eat cheese? Kraft cheese, is it rotten? Am I gonna get poisoned because of the water? How are we gonna wash our cucumbers? Are we gonna get typhoid? The electricity is not there, blah, blah, blah. These things. And so because of that, and until 2011, when the Syrian war started, I was really against doing anything about the war, and that video speaks about it in a very ironical way. And then, unfortunately, in 2011, I was pregnant. I was making a child in my belly when the Syrian revolution started, and it actually started by the arrest and killing of children. So the children who sprayed words against Bashar al-Assad's regime, who were arrested and their fingers, nails were removed and things like that. So for me it was very shocking because on a personal level I thought, if I'm going north to the Netherlands, you know, northwards, I'm gonna be more and more safe. You know, I'm obsessed with this because as a child that you grow up in the war, you're only obsessed with leaving or being safe. But then when I was pregnant, I came back to Lebanon because you need your mother, you need your husband, you need your father, you need to be surrounded by those who are concerned, I think. And then it was at the same time as the Syrian revolution started, then it turned into a war. So actually, but I myself, I'm also half Syrian. My mother is from Damascus, and during the Lebanese war, we used to escape to Damascus. So whenever, we always escaped from house to house. And the minute when all the houses were in danger, we would go to my grandmother's house in Damascus. So for me, this was like the safe, it's a dictatorship, but it was a place where there was a park. For the first time in my life, I see a real park, ducks, oh, they exist. No one has shot them, other children playing and things like that. And suddenly, this was reversed. Suddenly, the Syrian war actively started, not that it was heaven before, heaven, yeah. And then a lot of families like my family are half-half, so a lot of Syrians came to Lebanon because they have family, they have connections, you know, it's only it's only a few hours drive to Syria. And it's also usually there used to be no you know, visa requests between the Syrians and the Lebanese to enter those two countries. The history is very complicated and very charged. We're not gonna go into all the details, and people are divided in Lebanon and in Syria, you know, and I think the latest war made people even more and more hate each other, whether it's between Syrians themselves, of course, or Lebanese themselves, or Lebanese against Syrian, and it's a whole mess. So, so from my studio in Beirut, in the neighborhood where I was living, which is like a hip neighborhood, this is where a lot of the artists who first escaped from Syria came to settle and to live and to see what they're gonna do with themselves. Sometimes people thought it's gonna take 4 months, 5 months, 1 year, 2 years. Sometimes people arrived wounded. I remember a guy who came, we didn't know, but a while later his girlfriend told me he had a bullet in his stomach. He lived with it. Then France took him to, he was lucky he was taken to France, but even, I don't think he managed to heal it so easily. So all of this is so actual, and I was thinking I got away with the war, you know, like I had my childhood in the war and it's finished, yeah, no. And now what we're witnessing is really horrific. I mean, it's not to compare to anything else. We all know. So it was a big, you know, it took time for me to change that psychology of mine. Now that it's very actual, actually, Lebanon is a direct mirror of the war in Syria, you know, on that side. Whenever there are conflicts somewhere, you start to see people escaping and how they're escaping. You know, in the beginning, you had always the typical white car carrying so much luggage. Now it's like more and more people, homeless, children, begging, women, whatever. So, and you have to imagine also Lebanon is a very small country. Maybe it's smaller than London even, you know, it's like 4 million about. And then there's about 1 million of refugees. So it's like, it's very present. It's the daily life. It's not something that, oh yeah, it's not marginal. It's the thing. And what's interesting about Lebanon is that it has always been the country where refugees had to flee, like the Palestinians during the war I had witnessed, right, 78 and before, and so, and 1982 when they were massacred in Sabra and Shetila, and so on. So for me, it was also, unfortunately, but it was really a time where I couldn't leave anymore, because maybe because I'm also obsessed being myself half Syrian, having lived there in the 80s and 90s during the Hafiz al-Assad time. And, you know, it was a question mark. Should I just, you know, stand still, not do anything? How, or no, I can't. And if I want to be involved, how would I do that? And actually, I read then an article or like a interview with Mahmoud Darwish, the Palestinian poet, whom many of you probably know, where he spoke about that, you know, because there was a time he left to Paris, then he decided to go back, and there was a time Bomb magazine asked a colleague of him to do an interview with him. And it was only, they lived inside, I don't know where, sorry, I forgot, Ramallah or I don't know where. And then they only had 2 streets between them, but they were under siege, you know, there was like a curfew. And the deadline for this Bomb magazine interview was gonna, you know, they gave them 3 months to do it, and they weren't gonna do it because of they're under siege, even with only 2 streets between them. And finally, just there was 1 day left or something that they could meet for a few hours because the curfew was, you know, taken out. They met, they did the interview. And in that interview was very inspiring to me to start, you know, all over again and withdrawing, drawing. So in that interview, he says, I actually would have preferred to speak about existentialist matters, but now that I'm in this physical situation, I can't think of anything else because I'm surrounded, I'm stuck in there. So I'll have to speak about it. And that was liberating for me. And actually, this was the title of the work I did, I started to do, so I had this notebook, and what I did, because when people just come from Syria to Beirut, at that time there was kind of an invisible border shield between the people living in and the people who are coming. And also in the neighborhood where I am, because it's belonging to Beirut East, a lot of people were very discriminative and racist. Why? Because the Syrian army had occupied Lebanon for 30 years, and a lot of those families have suffered from that. You know, people were killed, jailed, raped. So it's not that easy, the whole thing. And so sometimes they were really racist in a very, I mean, it's like horrible. How can you accuse a child of 5? Or, you know. So I thought what I have to do is what I want to prove to myself or to prove to those people who are coming is that I would like to welcome them to Beirut, to my street, to where I am. So I started to invite them to my studio, and it just came to me that, okay, it's true that I'm totally against painting, but this is not painting, this is like drawing, because in that case, I'm against making pictures, you know? I mean, why do you make pictures? What does it mean? And also, so my idea was to invite every individual I meet to my studio and start to have conversations. We have a drink, we have conversations, I write them down, and I make the drawings. And actually, I had to, so maybe I could just show a few of those and read some of the texts, because for me, the drawing and the texts are very important. And I thought I'd like to meet at least 1,000 people, you know. It's taking years, but it's at least to dive into the scale of the crisis that we're facing. And at the same time, it's just a great chance to meet people, you know, to open up, you know, to start friendships as well. So in that sense, I don't know if, maybe it's a graphic witness, but at the same time, sometimes the drawings are, they're not, you can't really recognize the person, so you don't put anyone in danger. And the thing is, when you draw someone, if they have to be engaged with you, you know, they're sitting there, if, you know, when they like it, you're like more and more excited, and I do a few of them, and when I see it's the right moment, I ask the person to choose the one that they like, and then that they keep it. Sometimes I didn't make any good ones, so I don't dare to say that. But so, for instance, that man, I met him, and he used to have a shop, he says, for herbal, you know, like alternative medicine in Damascus. And then it burned down, and then he was working at a second-hand cloth shop for a Kurdish guy who was already, Syrian Kurdish, who was already for 20 years in Lebanon. Because the Kurdish people also were repressed, and they also escaped earlier, you know, they now continue, but before there were many groups of them. So in a way, it's all binding history together, and it depends people that you meet, from which generation they are and what they tell you, you know. So we don't necessarily speak about the war, or unless they want that, you know. It depends, you know, our encounter engenders our talks. This is Ahmad, who imagined that they could put all the Syrians in a few building blocks in China, and that's it, you know. The situation is solved. This girl, maybe I'll just show them. I stopped talking a bit. This woman is from Deir ez-Zor. Sometimes they have fun of me, you know. This is a very opinionated person, actually really important that I met him. So it's one more. That was a nice encounter also. This is a friend of mine who now had to go to Norway. And it goes on. So sometimes I showed it like that. Then sometimes I try to embroider the portraits as well. Then it gives you more time to reflect and to say other things. But I think I already spoke a lot, no? So I stop here.
Thank you so much. I will now introduce Erik van Lieshout. And we have, I think there's so many things coming up actually, so I'm just kind of holding on to when we can speak about them. Erik van Lieshout is a Dutch artist, and he lives in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. He studied in the Academy of Art and Design and the Atelier 63, both in the Netherlands. And he currently has a show on at the South London Gallery, which you might have seen, called 3 Social Works, with many other solo shows this year at the Hanover Kunstverein and Annette Gelling Gallery in Amsterdam, also in Belgium, in Brussels last year. The show must go on. His work addresses a kind of multitude of contemporary socio-political issues, and also this kind of modern consumer society. He looks at these from a very radically personal point of view and sort of adapting to the general behavior of his surroundings, where he becomes an active player in the action, which causes many various situations and provoking reaction in others. His work has been shown again very widely in Moscow, the Moscow Biennale in 2013, the 55th Venice Biennale, also Colombo Art Biennale in Colombo, Art Unlimited Basel Center, L'Édition Contemporaine Geneva, Rotterdam, and many, many other places. So I am going to then hand over to him.
Hello. I'm showing 2 drawings in the show, and because in the show in the drawing room, which opens tomorrow, and because these 2 drawings are only 2, I have many more. I want you to show the other drawings, because normally I make a video. That's the thing I do normally, but I always make drawings from when I started being an artist. Oh, no, this is not a good one. Here. And then, so these drawings I made them after the summer in 2014. I start editing a film, so I made a film in the camera, and then I start editing. And when you start editing, you don't think so much anymore, and you're only involved with the film. So, and then I go to my studio to make big drawings all the time. And then in 2014, in the summer, there were big riots in The Hague, which is 20 kilometers from Rotterdam. And these riots, I was like, whoa, do I go to these riots with my video camera, or what do I do? So I was super excited to go there, but I didn't go. So I took the photos of the riots and made drawings of them. That's actually it. And the riots were in 1 week. So I have to tell you this in 1 minute. So there were, at that time in 2014, there was a big airplane crash in the Ukraine. A Dutch airplane was shot down by the Russians, and there were 300 people killed. So all the media was all about this airplane crash. So at the same time, there were people killed in, now I hope I say everything good, but there were people killed in Palestine, because the Israeli people were attacking the Palestinians. But all the media was about the airplane. So there were in some neighborhoods in The Hague, there were people getting angry. They say, hey, our people are killed and we want to have attention to that. So then they go on the street with ISIS flags and with all Palestinian things and all young guys, and they go on the street. but this is a very mixed neighborhood. So at the next day, the Dutch guys also came out of the houses because there are Dutch people living there, and they also come out. No, this is our neighborhood. Don't go out. Don't make a riot. And then the next day, the ISIS people came out of the house. So there was a whole week of super funny and very good riots. So this is the and I didn't go there with my camera, which I normally do. So normally I go with my camera and make films about it, but this time I stay home and took the photos and sit on the floor and make big drawings. Well, how do I get? Oh, I know how to do this. Wait. So this. Fuck me. Yeah, and then I go like this. Where? I want the next one and the next one, but with this, no? With this one. Oh, sorry. I'm never on the computer.
You want all of them?
Yeah, and then I do this, you know. Thanks.
But the thing is, they might not all be if they're not all the
But
same
this is
format.
you are more or less.
No, because then they'll all open in Photoshop, actually.
This is good, no? And then I can do this. This. So these are the ISIS. This is 1 meter 50 with 2 meter 50. There's also one. This is in the show. And then after a while I start. This is the Dutch guys again. This is also very Dutch. 150 with 250. This is the angry Dutch people. Super angry, and they were really shouting and screaming because the ISIS people came out of the houses. So they were really fucked up. And in Holland, they're quite right-winged people. Very, very strong, as you know, eh? You know, yeah. So these are there. And yeah, that's the next one. So I like painting very much, but I'm a frustrated painter, so I start working with plastic. These are Dutch people again. It's also Dutch. This is ISIS again. And the photos are just from the newspaper. It's the Dutch guys again, but the police was also keeping them a little bit quiet. This is very big. This is 1 meter 80 with 3 meters something. The collage, eh? So I always like painting very much, but I'm more of a drawer. I'm more like making drawings. There I go. Oh, wait, not so far. Shit, how do I get back? Yeah, there you go. Wait, yeah, no. Yeah. And this, hey, nee. This is I don't do. Slideshow.
If we do this, then
Yes.
you can just
Oh,
go like
happy. Yeah, yeah. This one is very big. This is 1 meter 90 with 4 meters. So the right is me, and the left is actually not me, but I just made it up. And this is all in The Hague. And what I like the best is when I make these drawings is the background, is the houses and stuff. The Dutch, the typically Dutch, Dutch. This is my studio. This guy actually got killed in the ISIS war. The guy he's dead. But this is an Ukraine guy from the Ukraine, because at the same time the Ukraine was also important. This is the Dutchies. Dutchies, very Dutch. And this is my studio. It's a bit. This is small drawings. This is more a sketch. And then when I do this, I go also sit in the studio with the edit. So I'm also making the film at the same time. Totally other film. But normally I make big drawings of film stills of my films. Photos of my films. But this time it was so boring and there was so much happening at the time in the real life that I thought, no, I have to do this now. You see here, this is small drawings, collage. Easy. This is on canvas. Now this is my studio, and you see how they hang when I hang them. The other side of the studio. My studio is in a very nice neighborhood in Rotterdam. This is Putin. Oh, he is again. This is also Ukraine. Collage. Something else. Collage. Drawings. Cow. These are the study for the big one. This one too. This is actually after the riot. So you have a riot, and then after the riot is when you're finished, when you're relaxed, you drink a beer, and you have the riot is gone, and then there's always a moment that you're there. But the riot, there's a moment of after the riot, which is very interesting after the riot. I think the riot itself is, of course, super important, but after the riot is also interesting. So people are hanging, still standing in, on, how do you say, when the lights, the streets of the lights, they're still there. So this is a super big one. This is right-wing, guys. You see in the t-shirt. After the riot. The police is also very much there after the riot because everything is getting quiet. I like very much protest posters. This is very big. It's also after the riot. So here you see the two sides. Yeah, this is the Palestinian guys also relaxing after the riot. Me also. Also after the riot. It's also after the riot with a flag. This one I never could hang because the museums don't want ISIS flags. Which is a pity because it's very beautiful, but yeah. Now you can see the paintings in the gallery, the drawings. And then it looks very clean. Yeah. Okay, that's it.
Some ways, and we'll invite questions because otherwise you all have been sitting patiently and we'll need to be brought into this conversation. And thank you so much because it's been really interesting in terms of the connections that we're here. And in a way, we can talk about kind of drawing and witness, and I probably don't want to do that because I think it's more the complexity and the kind of the idea of resistance that really interested me. And I mean, I've also been reading recently a lot Manuel Delanda on his kind of notion of assemblage theory, with a sort of idea of the world and society being a set of complexities and assemblages. And from all these things you're talking about, it's this kind of mongrel life that we all lead, I think, of constant multiplicities and constant mixing. And even if you think about this panel, it's entirely mixed and displaced and reconfigured. And there isn't a single, well, actually, do you have pure Dutch blood running through your veins?
Yeah.
I don't know, I just quite like to know.
Pure Dutch. Yeah.
Is it pure? Is it pure?
It's super pure.
Okay, so
there's no mix.
But actually, you know, that, and so I just like to open that idea of drawing as a kind of mongrel form of resistance. And I like the word mongrel. To anyone.
What does it mean, mongrel?
It's a hybrid. It's a sort of, but it's not necessarily a kind of pedigree hybrid.
It's a kind of a pejorative
It's
term.
a pejorative, but I always feel myself like a kind of mongrel, and I like that term because
it's a dog which is not one breed.
it's a dog, but it's not. It's a kind of it's pejorative, but I use it affectionately about many things actually. So and all these things feel really, really significant, and drawing does become a way of actually resisting in some way through and becoming this kind of assemblage of things in a very immediate way. I don't know.
Yeah, it's boring to say, but when you make a drawing, a drawing is open, so you can mix very easy. When you make a painting or video, it's very, very much a direction. So when you make a drawing, you mix things up also. You know, it's a bit formal to say this, or old-fashioned, but you can do so many things in a drawing.
And you've all talked about being in the real world, and this idea of the real world is very interesting as well. That somehow, you know, your very, very moving notion of the connection of wanting to be in the immediacy of things, and in a way, the recent things you were talking about with the death moments, they are in a sense the real world, but also deferred, and drawing becomes that, and also, you know, with you sort of wanting to be in the riot, but not entirely, but that moment between existing in the real world and also escaping it at the same time.
Well, I think that I was having a nice conversation with someone in the audience about spirit photography and how I use it in my work, and I think that I said a little bit about it in there, in that when you're drawing something, it's different from a photograph because you have both the real dimension and the unseen dimension because you have your subjective hand in it, and I think that's what I like about drawing, is it can sort of take different kinds of information and put it on the same hierarchy so that you're reading it in a different way from a collage, for example, because it's got an authority as one image for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the way you use drawing is like, or it's very painterly, right?
Yeah.
In that sense, like maybe they are drawings, but I see them very painterly. Yeah, right?
They're painterly.
Yeah.
Very much.
In that sense, not like a collage, the way.
Yeah, almost.
Yours are. You said yours are collages.
Some are like a painting, eh? Yours.
Yeah,
No, there's no painting in there. No.
No, but it's really worked out. It's really amazing, the material. I find it, how you work it out.
But you said you got frustrated with painting, so you went to collage.
Yeah, I'm coming from painting.
And
But I like her work very much because of the world.
Yeah.
It's really good.
The what?
The world.
The world, the
How
real world,
how
the
you
world.
connect to the world.
The
Yeah.
world.
I found that
because it's so direct to make really a work about the war.
Yeah.
It is too difficult. But you go everywhere around it and still make a painting or a work about the war. It's really interesting.
But I really like the fact that you said that, you know, you hated painting and you hated this idea of copying in a
and
way.
of course it's a love-hate, right?
But then when the
I
peop-
said I hate, and it's a love-hate. It's a bit like they have this very famous saying, you know, once a heroin addict, always an addict. I think it's the same with painting.
But I think with painting, because we're sitting here in a drawing show, so and the drawing always hates to paint and wants to paint also, because the drawing is not a real artwork. The painting is a real artwork. So we're frustrated because we want to be painters.
I feel like we're drifting.
It's old-fashioned to talk about that because we want to talk about politics and the world, but we also want to be a painter.
But I like being a drawer because, like I was saying, I really like just using pencil because then there's no mystery for anyone how I've made it. It's like it's just anyone could sort of get what I'm doing. You see what I mean? Yeah.
You look suspicious.
I mean, it's technically really advanced. I don't think anyone can do what you're doing.
I'm pretending it's accessible.
But she paints also in the film. The film things are like also more very much.
How
like
do you
painting.
do that?
Just keep going over it with the pencil.
Yeah, that's good.
So
You mean on a white paper or?
Well, it's drawn and then.
You can ask for tricks later.
Yeah, we do.
No, it's nice to.
Well, it's just the whole white paper is covered in graphite. Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
Fine.
Because we have so little time, shall we open it? I think it would be good to actually invite people to ask questions. So I would like to do so now.
I just wanted to ask about, particularly Catherine, but also the rest of you, about the ethics of representation. I suppose because of the Dana Schultz's work, it's been a conversation, and I just wondered how you felt about the different perspectives on that work and how you feel about it in your own work.
Well, I think it's really good to bring her up. I mean, there's a lot of different. It's probably quite a long answer for the time. But I feel very uncomfortable with this representation, and partly I'm doing it because I don't really feel that those images should be in the public domain, especially since if they're a digital image, that last frame is literally 1/25 of a second. It's not enough to sum up someone's life. And also when you get sort of hundreds of images of the last scene of somebody's life, it is probably the first time in their life that they have been so represented. In the popular discourse, because a lot of these times these people are quite marginalized and underrepresented. So I want to draw attention, but I don't call them portraits. They're all titled "The Death of This Person," and they usually focus on the surrounding environment. With the Dana Schultz painting, I think the anger was because she's a white painter, and the image is so non-representational and so violent, and also the fact that it's a painting of Emmett Till, who was murdered when he was a little boy. He was lynched, and what happened is also that was the woman later took back her story, so he's known to be innocent, but she's still alive and has never been brought to trial. So there's a lot of complex sort of unfair is a bad word, but injustices there that haven't been addressed. But with the images I'm using today, they're very much part of a contemporary discussion which is ongoing with the kind of Black Lives Matter movement, and the images are much more widespread. The Emmett Till one is a very isolated moment, and it's not really enough to talk about it. I get sorry if you know, but I hope that answers a little bit.
I felt that there in your work that that the images aren't explicit or violent in that way, and that perhaps your representation was more elegiac, I suppose.
Well, I try very hard to make them very beautiful, to sort of take that last image and make it into something better. That's why I work so hard with the pencil. And I guess with Dana Schultz, it's sort of canvas is slashed, and I mean,
That's not true, but no, it's not true. Well, she's just a painter. So I agree with she's white and this and that, and the thing I agree. You cannot talk about her painting because she's a very good painter.
Well, I can, I think. I mean, it is as I have described it. the painting. That's what it looks like.
No, it's a painting. It's not like that. No.
Anyway, I would actually urge you to look up the discussion.
Any?
Well, can I ask Mounira about representation then? Just because your film, showed your feet going, and we also had your face there, and I wondered about you're figuring others, and I'm wondering about this figuration or absence of yourself in the film.
Yeah, in the film, because I mean, one of the things that drove me to do portraits was, you're gonna laugh, but like a very regional show of Rembrandt's drawings in Zutphen. But at that time they didn't have the passport picture that you see in my video, right? And he made amazing, really passport size.
Yeah,
Yeah,
big,
yeah. Self-portraits, but also
Etching.
his neighbor, his mom, etching. And actually, it's also very fascinating. A lot of the very famous portraits, self-portraits of Rembrandt, I found one of them in Munich in the Alte Pinakothek. It's just like this.
The painting,
They're
you mean?
tiny.
Yeah,
The painting.
yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's with the curly hair.
Yes, yeah,
It's
totally.
super beautiful. Alte Pinakothek.
Yes,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that
yeah.
one, when you read about it, when you see it, I mean, it's such a present picture that you never think it's that big. It's that big, and it's has so much impact over everyone, right?
Yeah.
As a painter. So in that sense, this was also with the help of Darwish. I was like, it would be great just to do portraits, and maybe if I do 1,000, I'll become better at drawing at the end. And it's really a matter of practice. I mean,
But you did, eh?
Yeah.
How many?
So how many? Yeah.
No, I mean now I have maybe some 300-400.
And do you think
But
you've
it
got
takes
better?
time, huh?
Do you think there is such a thing as getting better at them?
If I continue, if I have a very busy week drawing many people, or having the guts to do that, to meet a few people a day or 2 persons, let's say, and continuing one week like that, of course you get better and better. And of course, when you stop 2 weeks, you'll have to, it's like you have to oil it again. But
so you still do it,
I still
because
do
these people were all from
these are the early ones.
the early one. So you now you do it
I
with Dutch
continue.
people and other people. Or
No, what I'm doing, what happened is that I started in Beirut,
Yeah.
and in 2015 they created a new way not to let the Syrians stay too long, or to really cut down on people staying. And so they start to come by the sea to here, and that's when you start to have all the sea images and people being filtered, actually killed before they arrived, or those who make it will make it, and so on. So a lot of my friends have made it this way to Europe, or by plane through Russia. Actually, there was a time in 2015, as a Syrian, you could get very easily a visa to Russia in 24 hours. And then they crossed from there to Norway, and so on.
And how?
By the board, they went to a border city in Russia, which is only 200 meters away from Norway, but that you have to do by the bike.
By bike? And that's what,
Because legally it's okay. If you walk, you're not allowed, but if you bike, you can.
But this you see in her drawings.
Yeah.
That's cool, eh? Yeah.
You see that?
Yeah, because all this talking, you don't, but you feel, you see it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But so then in that moment I start to follow the people. But that's also my own path. I mean, I also try to come this way, just like everyone else. So in a way it's a self-portrait as well, I think. As opposed to the video where I only show the feet and then the passport picture as a joke, Yeah. It's a bit like that.
There was a question
yeah,
at the
I have a
back.
question. Maybe it's not a question, but just like more of a comment, because I'm really confused by what I just saw, and I think like that's a huge problem, that to have that and to witness it and to stay silent. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, really well.
Okay. Is it Erik, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'd like to understand, what are you trying to achieve with those paintings? Because you said like a few stuff that I can't remember everything, because I was like, oh my God, I was boiling from inside. Like I'm being really honest, and I'm trying to stay positive. But how come you can I don't know, I'm really trying to understand, go in the street and record some sort of like confrontations between two groups of people and paint that, and without having anything to say, rather than just like painting these horrible things, horrible scenes, and maybe like putting them in galleries, and they might be sold one day or whatever you're gonna do with them. Let me just finish my questions, because when you say like really simplistic stuff as ISIS people on one side and Dutch people, as if Dutch people couldn't be part of ISIS, or when you say I'm a painter, but this is political, but sometimes I just want to be a painter, as if a painter couldn't be political, and if those things couldn't be the same, and you just, I'm quite confused, to be honest. Like, I don't understand. These are real people and real lives, and going outside with your camera and recording it as a phenomenon, or something trendy that will, I don't know, interest the people right now, because we need to be political to gather people and bring them in the gallery. But yeah, I'm really confused.
Okay. So I know these people very well. So I feel like I know these people really good, and I live with them, I talk with them, I sleep with them, yeah? This is how I do. So I'm interested in this situation. There's a totally fucked up thing going on, and I have to do something with it. It's not trendy. Maybe it's trendy also. I don't give a. This is not my thing, you know. I have to do it. I'm an artist. I can close my door, you know. I cannot go out. I can do nothing, you know. I have to do something about it.
Maybe
quite
to
simple.
make it clear also that people who don't live in the Netherlands, there's something that also surprised me I understood, and also not in defense, but he just said that he didn't use his camera. He was too lazy to go, and he used pictures from the news. So these pictures were anyway diffused. And I think what I really appreciate is this, how it's emanating expression and color. Didn't you see that aspect in those works? To me, it's like, I find it amazing how, Erik is able to like create this modern contemporary image that is emanating light and color, and also I think it's full of history of painting when you see how he's using the black and the layers, and the light comes out, and also the Dutch houses in the background. That's something very important in the relation of the history with architecture in the Netherlands, which maybe if you don't live there, it might not mean anything to you.
No, but I'm not discussing the aesthetic or the beautification of something that is horrible. Like, that's not
why is
what
it
I'm
horrible to
that's
demonstrate?
It's a reality. I suppose
Yeah.
it's also a reality
Why
of
should
life.
you paint
But
only
because-
flowers?
No, but not, wow.
Since when?
This is one way of seeing it. But some days there is other things than just painting. If you wanna make the change, you can do other stuff than just painting. You know, that's what I'm saying.
But
Yeah.
maybe it's not about making
But just
change.
I wanted to say something very interesting that also very much shocked me when I was very young and I lived in the Netherlands as a student, and there were riots organized, and that's something that happens in The Hague. You know, this is where the peace palace of the world exists. This is where if you have a governor who's a criminal will be judged. So you always have, the judgment of the crimes, and these things happen in The Hague. It's a world thing, not only for the Dutch. And also, for instance, the Palestinians would go in a demonstration, and the Dutch organize it in an amazing way because they have this skill to divide things that we don't have, for instance. So like the Palestinians would go demonstrate from 1 to 2 against Israelis. The Israelis go demonstrate the same day from 3 to 5 against the Palestinians. Where else in the world this could happen? And once I was going to a Palestinian demonstration, but of course I'm Lebanese, so I always arrive late. And then I see, oh, I'm between Israelis, what the fuck? So these things, I mean, people are killing each other, but this is a neutral ground. And that makes the fringe very confusing. You're right, I mean, it is confusing that you have, now is the time for the ISIS. You go in, now is the time for the extreme right wing. So,
I also thought Holland was also had this nutshell situation all the time, because it's a super small country, but everything what happens in big happens where it's in very small and very clear, like she says, like
clear cut.
But it's maybe these also moments of absurdity that actually this kind of strange reality would exist in. I remember going to the big anti-capitalist protests in London, where they burnt a big Trojan horse in Oxford Circus, and there was rioting going on. It was mad, and we were just walking around, and there were these two teenage girls who were outside Topshop, and they were in tears because it was closed. While the police riots were, and they were throwing, and their main kind of problem was that Topshop was closed in the middle of this riot. And I think these kind of strange notion of urban protest, and we do exist in it, and it is confusing, and I think that's...
But I just want to say, the actual question, what you actually said, I understand, because you're not so much talking about just the subject matter, but the artist's relationship to how they present it.
And the art world, maybe.
And how... For example, perhaps it was a simplistic presentation of a deeper subject. So I think to say I'm an artist, I can just make a picture, I don't think it's enough when you're working with the idea of witnessing, because there's a bigger dialogue there.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. I find it sad actually that we do this kind of stuff, especially when we claim that we are artists. That's all right, you can hear me, right? I don't want to be that guy controversial anyway.
It's okay. It's good. It's good to be.
No, but I haven't got anything to say. Like, that's all right.
Do I have to call time? Okay. Unfortunately, but I just like to thank all the artists and Rebecca, Kate, Mary from the drawing room, Ellie, and just everyone. So who? Sorry, what? And Anne. Well, obviously, and who the kind of the visitors. I was from for this event. So thank you very much.
The show opens tomorrow.
And the show opens tomorrow at the drawing room. So you're all very welcome to go to the opening and also to visit it afterwards.